Our second speaker is Jenny Kast. Jenny's speech is from the first speech in the Humorously Speaking manual. It's 5 to 7 minutes long. And she's giving it because Jenny is a very dull and dry person. She's decided that it would be good to take a stab at being funny by working through the Humorously Speaking workbook. Today, she will share with us how she learned to get grumpy people to love her. Please welcome Jenny Kast.
This is going to come as a surprise to most of you, but I was once part of a special operations task force. I was the head of an elite crew that was only called upon for the most dangerous of assignments. It was pretty much like the Navy SEALs, just with less protective gear. Many an hour was spent eyeing the enemy lines and strategizing our attack plan. Well, my attack plan. Because I was the only one that was ever able to cross into enemy territory and return unscathed. These battles that we fought were not in the Middle East, but actually in our own country. And it happened only one time a year on Thanksgiving Day. The location? My grandmother's kitchen. Every year she spent all day making all of this food for us. And as the hours passed, she would get angrier and angrier. She never enjoyed cooking for 25 people, but she also never accepted any help and hated it when we entered the kitchen. Many times a cousin or an uncle would bring a new significant other, and that person would quickly judge us for being lazy, good-for-nothings that were just taking advantage of this woman's hospitality. Then, at some point in time, she would make the mistake of crossing into the threshold into the kitchen and, you won't believe it, offering to help. You would think that she had entered the dragon's lair and offered to polish her treasures. Most relationships didn't last very long after that fateful Thanksgiving Day. And all of my cousins and even my aunts and uncles, if they realized at some point during the day that they needed a glass of water or just a little snack or, heaven forbid, a cup of coffee, they would start shaking as they realized what they were about to do. But then usually they'd realize they could just come talk to me. Because you see, I have always been the favorite. I've been able to slip in and out of the kitchen undetected. Or if my grandma did notice me, she was usually okay with stopping and chatting for a little bit before I'd skedaddle back to the living room with my spoils. Every once in a while, I could even plant a little kiss on her cheek. This was a feat worthy of a medal that the rest of my family was never able to master. But it took some doing to win the unconditional curmudgeonly love of both my grandma and my grandpa. And this is how I did it. First, I spent a lot of quality time with them, which also means I put up with a lot of verbal abuse. One summer in college, I lived with them during an internship in their small town. Every night, we would sit around the family table that's been in our family for generations, eating Midwestern comfort food on a red and white checkered tablecloth. And every single night, my grandpa would look up from his biscuits and gravy and say, "Are you still here? When are you leaving? You are getting fat." Words that a 21-year-old female loves to hear. But this was not my first rodeo, so I would take his fork and continue eating, and we'd move right on. The second thing I would do is that I always knew how to pick my battles, which meant I never fought any. My grandma had a specific way that you were supposed to get to the grocery store. They lived in a small town. It took 4 minutes to get there, regardless of your route. But if you decided to continue on to Lake Road without turning left onto Pearl Street, it was like you were adding an hour to the trip. And my grandma would sit in the passenger seat next to whatever family member was driving and start shaking and grunting a little bit whenever you would scroll past Pearl Street. I found this to be quite disconcerting, So Pearl Street and I became very well acquainted, and my grandma loved me more. Finally, I made sure that I dove right into their interests and forgot all about my own. I moved away from this small town when I was in 5th grade, and from that point until my grandmother passed away when I was 26, she would send me the comics and a letter every week, which that actually was pretty wonderful. And after a few years, I realized that I should probably reciprocate this letter writing. So for over a decade, I would write her letters filled with all the things she loved most. Those things include kittens, hummingbirds, and the most tantalizing conversation that she loved to have, the weather. I forgot all about college boyfriends or what major I was choosing. I would never bore her with topics like that. That's why I had friends. So as it turns out, all I had to do to win the unconditional love of both of my grandparents, as well as the opportunity to stroll into the kitchen and pour myself a cup of coffee whenever I wanted, I just had to do 2 simple things. Agree with everything they wanted, and have a lot of patience. And if you are listening to this today, you're trying to glean some relationship advice, ignore everything that I've said. A relationship like that is called dysfunctional. But they lived far enough away and I saw them so rarely that it was worth it. And my moment of glory happened on the last night that I lived with them. My grandpa was shoveling meatloaf into his mouth and grumbling about something when I reminded him that I was leaving the next day. He put his fork down and looked at me and said, "You're leaving? But do you have to go?" I was just joking about all those things I said. I don't want you to leave, and you're not that fat. Now that, my friends, is what I call curmudgeon love.